we're going to start with that top story right now. Biogen shares in the red after the company said its experimental Alzheimer's drug is unlikely to be effective and that it is going to halt research on that drug. This is a major setback in some ways for the drug maker's efforts to find treatment for such a troubling disease. Joining us now is Yahoo Finance's Heidi Cheung with the latest, and we're watching these shares tank. I mean, it's a huge percentage that they've fallen.
Yeah, this is about a quarter value of them in market cap, Adam. And also, this is the lowest level that the stock has been trading at since July of 2016. This is really bad news for Biogen, the investors, and the millions of people suffering from Alzheimer's who are really hoping that this drug would be a breakthrough in treatment for the disease. But I also have to note that this is just a bigger story, that it's not only hard to make a drug to treat Alzheimer's and other brain disorders, but it is also a nail in the coffin for the treating of the beta amyloid protein in order to treat Alzheimer's. A lot of analysts were really hopeful back in July when phase 1 of this drug was successful. They started putting out notes saying that this was going to be a $12 billion sales generating drug. But of course, we're seeing the shares tank today. And analysts were actually getting a little antsy come January because they hadn't heard anything from Biogen and its Japanese pharmaceutical partner. Now, Biogen is facing a lot of issues here. They have a very old drug. It's considered mature at this point for multiple sclerosis. They also have another big drug called Spinraza, but that drug is facing a lot of competition in the space right now. So this is just really bad news for the company and just Alzheimer's and other neurological disorders in general.
All right, Heidi, we're going to bring this to the panel that we want to talk about this because National Taxpayers Union Senior Fellow Mattie Duppler joins us, and RSM Chief Economist Joe Brusuelas is also joining us. On the phone is SVB Leerink analyst Goeffrey Porges. And Goeffrey, let's start with you. This was a huge bet that investors were making on Biogen. This is a company that dates back to, 1979 when it was first formulated. But how do they go forward? This is certainly not a death knell, but it's a setback.
Yes, this is a major setback, a huge disappointment for investors, for the company, and perhaps even more so for patients and their families that have really invested a lot of time and hope in not just this drug, but all the preceding drugs targeting beta amyloid. And as your reporter suggested, this is really the final nail in the coffin for that beta amyloid hypothesis. In terms of Biogen's path forward, I think all we can say for sure is something's going to change at Biogen. They will either become a target for an acquirer interest, or they'll become an acquirer themselves and deploy the cash flow from their remaining assets by adding other companies that are focused on neurological diseases and try and bolster their pipeline in that way. But regardless, they're in an untenable position now with three relatively mature franchises and a lot of competitive pressure. We think that revenue is going to go down indefinitely in the low single digits from here, and they have to bring in some other products to offset that erosion.
And talk to us about what this drug could have then meant for the company. I mean, what were your revenue estimates for it, and would it sort of single-handedly transform the prospects of the company? It sounds like from what you're saying it would have.
Yes, we had commented that we thought if this study worked, Biogen stock would be worth well north of $400 a share. And that's even with sharing the revenue from aducanumab with their partner, Eisai. Of course, Eisai stock hasn't traded yet. It's traded in Japan, and that company is based in Tokyo, but they were equally heavily invested in aducanumab and beta amyloid and Alzheimer's, and they'll suffer the same punishment as Biogen tomorrow. But we had indeed forecast revenue by the mid-2020s on a non-probability adjusted basis of over $12 billion by 2026. So this was a massive opportunity. We all know how many patients there are, how serious the disease is. And we did think that there would be pretty widespread adoption if the drug was successful. Now, we rated only a 30% chance of success. That was probably generous, obviously, given the recent news today. But so it didn't make a huge difference, and we weren't recommending the stock. But if it worked, it would have been an absolute home run.
All right. We want to thank you, Goeffrey Porges, SBV Leerink analyst, for joining us. Want to take this to the panel here in studio. Let me start with you, Joe, as an economist. I mean, perhaps that pharmaceuticals and biotech may not be your focus always. But when investors are betting on a company that's betting on one big drug, that seems really dangerous, as we're now watching what's happening.
That's why you sometimes when the market gets overbalanced and you see a superstar stock fall almost 30% in a morning, you worry that it's going to spill over into the broader life sciences sector in general of the economy, but particularly over in NASDAQ land where you can see some outsized declines if one company really goes sideways.
And also, does it also sort of emphasize the importance of innovation for economic growth in the U.S.? And how are we doing on that front? And how much fuel is it going to give to GDP? Well,
I was just in San Diego, Carlsbad, which is one of the 2 centers of life sciences, and it's just on fire. We're doing very well. And in fact, basically the new economy cities, the big 12 metros that drive growth, if we didn't have that sort of innovation, we wouldn't have a 2% growth rate. We'd have 1% growth. I mean, it's that important.
Well, and it's interesting, too. You can't ignore the context for why it's so expensive and why it's such a huge failure when these companies do fail on a trial like this. And it's because the regulatory process that we have right now makes it such an onerous undertaking. I mean, that's the reason we have these behemoths who can undertake this kind of research development, invest in the kind of IP rights you need to develop these kinds of drugs. I would like to see a regulatory environment that has a more robust environment so we could see more of that economic growth contributing to this industry, and then we could see more companies taking risks like this.
If some of the onerous regulation comes off, what you'll see is middle-sized companies begin to innovate, right? Yep. With the regulatory framework we have now, they just don't have the capital depth to deal with it.
In this case, though, it wasn't regulation that killed this. The drug failed.
We're just talking broader economy.
It only makes space for a couple big players, and it makes a failure so costly that we're now talking about what the future of Biogen is because they can't survive after having a failure like this.
And we shouldn't see that roll over into the broader space. That's not what you want to see.